Very good morning. Distinguished guests on the dais, all the esteemed audience, and the main part of this summit, I guess, which are the students of this university and the business school. I am delighted to be here with you and thank the organizers of the summit and the Amity world for having given me this opportunity of sharing my thoughts here with you. The theme of the summit is connecting business with civil society and education. Now, India has reached a stage which those of us who started their careers a long time ago never thought was possible. We have been growing at 9% a year, approximately 3 times the growth rate we experienced for a long, long period during the so-called Hindu age growth economy. We are a highly regulated, socialist kind of environment where everybody looked to government for everything. After 1991, everybody now has the freedom virtually to do what they like in whatever manner they like, and government interference is almost non-existent. No licenses, no controls, no regulation, foreign exchange, almost nothing which stops you doing business anywhere you want to do. And I think it is the inherent genius of the Indian people that having been given the freedom in 1991, and I'm literally saying this, having been given the freedom in 1991, India have shown that they are world-class. They can perform as well as any. There are, of course, a whole lot of factors which can be corrected and we think will enable us not only grow double digits on a sustained basis, and I'll come to those, but which will enable us to actually become more competitive than even China is. I was told that one of the reasons why I was asked to speak here was because of the success of Maruti. Everybody knows, of course, about the success of Maruti. I've also described how Maruti grew and what happened to Maruti in a book which I wrote a few months ago. So I will not go into that. But one factor I want to mention here, especially because your Vice Chancellor mentioned that as a key factor in both, which is building a bond between management and all employees. The one reason why I think Maruti today occupies the dominant position which it does in the Indian manufacturing industry, car industry, is because when we started, we decided that we had to change the traditional relationships which exist between workers, unions, and management. As you know, historically, because of starting from Karl Marx about the so-called conflict between the interests of workers and of capital, and then going on to our socialist system, we all grew up in a system where the unions and the managements were adversaries. The unions would look upon management as people who had to be constantly fought with in order to get their legitimate rights. The management thought that workers were a necessary evil. They were required because without them work would not be done, but they had to be kept in their place and somehow you have to get production out of them. But give them as little as possible, because if you acted more benevolently toward them, they would get spoiled, and it's like if you give an inch, they'll ask for a mile. So that was the attitude in which industry grew up, and to a large extent that reigned. But we found, especially after looking at Japan, that long-term productivity just does not come if that kind of relationship exists. The biggest asset for improving competitiveness, improving productivity, reducing cost, improving quality in any manufacturing organization, the biggest asset, most important asset are the workers, because they are the guys who are actually producing the product. It's not produced by managers. It's not produced by supervisors. It's the workers who are 75%, 80% of the total employees. If you have an organization where 75, 80% of the employees are on one side, the remaining 25% are on the other side, and both are pulling against each other, what happens to that organization? If you look at Indian industry today and look at what Japan did in building its industry, you'll see the enormous difference in productivity. A lot of us tended to attribute lower costs of Japanese production and the dominance of Japanese in manufacturing because we thought they were being subsidized. Factually, absolutely incorrect. The Japanese became leaders in manufacturing because of the role played by the workers. The management was able to win the trust and confidence of the workers. The workers came to believe, because of this trust and education, the communication between managers and workers, that their long-term future would be far brighter if they worked to improve the productivity of their company so that the company would grow, the company would increase profit, the company would be able to compete with others and export in the world market. Both would lead to their higher profits, and the system would be one in which such growth, such prosperity of the company would be shared equitably with the workers. But this trust and confidence between managers and workers is what led to Japan transforming its economy in the 1950s to what happened by the 1970s. In the 1950s, Japan had similar union situation and problems as we had in India. No different, but it transformed it. So we brought that culture in Maruti. I'm not going to how we got there, but believe me, it can be done if there is a conviction and will on the part of management. They have to win the confidence and trust of the workers and communicate with them. Workers are not adversaries. Workers are not fools. They also realize what is in their interest. But somebody has first to educate them, secondly to implement policies which will make it happen. Why am I harping on this? Because I believe that the future sustainable growth of the Indian economy and our ability to maintain a stable social environment in India is related to creating jobs which will enable more and more people to be productive, to earn enough money to get above the poverty line, to reduce the pressure on land. And that job creation can only come from manufacturing. The service industry has grown rapidly in India. The service industry cannot provide 13, 14 million jobs a year, which is what we need if we are going to meet our problem of the young people who are coming into the workforce, who expect jobs, who want productive jobs, who want a decent living. You cannot give a decent living without growing manufacturing. The government of India realizes that the national manufacturing policy aims to increase the share of manufacturing to GDP by 25%, to 25% from the present 16%, and that requires that all of us who are in industry and business have to see how to accelerate and sustain manufacturing. We have not managed more than 8% growth in manufacturing. We need to get at least a sustained 13% growth in manufacturing if we are going to meet the problems that I have just outlined. Now, what are the constraints to this? Obviously, manufacturing will grow if we can continue to improve productivity, reduce costs, improve quality of products. Because there is competition from outside. Globalization means a flatter world. Globalization means lower barriers to imports. It gives us the opportunity to export, but it also gives more competitive countries the right to import products into India and sell them. So if we do not improve our competitiveness on a sustained basis, we may find that even 8% growth may not be possible, let alone 12%. So we have to improve competitiveness. And to improve competitiveness, the barriers which I foresee come first what I mentioned, the relationship between management and the workers. We have to look at all the factors which today create a conflict of interest between workers and the management and see how to restore harmony, how to bring about a relationship where both sides realize that neither can do without the other, that both sides are necessary for getting this competitiveness going. The second part, second situation today is the availability of well-educated managers of skilled manpower at levels. There's a huge growing shortage of management. We produce 2,000 MBAs a year, yet we are terribly short of managers in India. 200,000 MBAs is 1% of the global output of MBAs. If India produces the bulk of engineers we produce are not employable. The bulk of graduates from our colleges, whether they are arts or science, don't even know how to write and speak correctly, let alone contribute. So that is the state of our education. It is something which requires urgent attention of everybody in this country. It can't be left to government, because I do not believe that government by itself can solve this problem. It requires private participation. And because it requires private participation, I feel that we need to view the relation policy which we have. We need to see why do we persist with this age-long belief, so it's not easy to shed, that education must be not for, why should it not be profit? We need to supplement the resources which go to education at all levels, whether it's primary schools, whether it's middle school, whether it's higher education, whether it's technical education, whether it's skill development, vocational training. We need to increase resources here. How do we increase resources? Resources partly is money, which to some extent government can provide also. But what about the implementational capability, the management capability? Where government falls mostly is in its management and implementational capability. And money is stretched. If you look at how primary school education is carried out in the rural areas, small towns and villages, if you see why people today flock to private schools like Delhi, they're willing to pay money under the table to get admission, it tells you what is happening to our education in this country. But we will not get the required inflows of private capital if we do not allow money to come in from corporates, from big businessmen, on the basis that you can decline from your investment. You money invested if you do not get dividends on that money. It's a trend which is changing as I read at it, because we do need to improve both the quality and the quantity of our educational system throughout, and that can only happen through this. The second situation I have is linked to the content of our education, especially business education. Most, meaning the IIMs, and I have some knowledge of IIMs, been on the board of IIMs for 10, 11, 12 years. I've headed a committee which was appointed by India for inquiring into the state of affairs of all the IIMs, to chairman of new IIM also. So I have some idea. The content of the teaching in these IIMs, and therefore in most business schools, if not all, plus the curriculum, plus the case studies, is all based on the American model. We look to the Western and particularly the American business schools, the American universities, to decide how we should carry out our education. We compare ourselves with the American business schools. Why is it not appropriate for us? I'll just tell you two things. One, what is the state of manufacturing in the United States? Manufacturing in the United States has been declining for a long time. Except for certain very high-tech areas, the United States is not at all competitive in manufacturing. On the other hand, we are in a situation where we have to increase our manufacturing, become more competitive. So, a system of education where people are primarily now going into services, going to the financial sector, they want to go to Lehman Brothers and they want to go in JP Morgan and such places, is not appropriate for Indian conditions. We need to concentrate on manufacturing, how to go manufacturing. Students from our business schools don't want to go to manufacturing. They don't want to work in manufacturing. They don't want to get their hands dirty. That's the way we are teaching our students what to do, and those are the better schools. Secondly, the US succeeds in manufacturing because they are able to put in large amounts of capital and large amounts of technology. India is not a capital-intensive country. We cannot build manufacturing competitiveness based on our capital resources. And therefore, we have to develop a system where it's the people who will contribute to productivity, the people who will contribute to quality and competitiveness, not capital by itself. We have to understand that we do not have the kind of technologies which are available to the West. We have to work with technologies which we develop, which we can get from abroad, on the basis of which we can build our manufacturing competitiveness. So for all factors, the American system is not applicable to us. Another important factor, the American economy has ensured over all these years that even the so-called poor in America, have a social support network, the system of ensuring that at least people do not go hungry at night. There is a system which ensures that. We don't have such a system. Because people have reached certain level of living a certain quality of life, resentment against large disparities in income is comparatively less. And therefore, in the American system, if a CEO gets $20 million a year, which many do get, and the worker gets only $40,000 a year, it still doesn't lead to that kind of tension, because with $40,000, he still lead a life in which he is not starving or which he can educate his children. In India, the situation is quite different. We have a large number of people well below the poverty line. And these large disparities which we are copying in our system from the American system, the CEO salaries and the workers' salaries in India would have a ratio 1:200, 1:300. In Japan, this ratio is 1:5, 1:7. Much bigger corporations, but the ratio is 1:5, 1:7. In Germany, which is the only really productive manufacturing country in Europe, the ratio is 1:9, 1:10. We apparently are such a affluent country that we can afford 1:200, 1:300. What does this lead? Building the kind of bond which your wife is talking about between workers and management. If I am where I see my MD gets 200 times, 300 times my salary, will I want him? I think this is again something which needs to be considered. So I think that the future of India is great, but we need to look at what we are doing. We should not blindly copy what we think is the right way of education, that America is today the most powerful, biggest country in the world. Of course it is. There's lots to be learned from America. But part of that learning should also tell us what not to copy from America. We must choose what to copy, what not to copy. And with these words, I'll thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and all the best for the summit.